Hi, welcome to week 4 of our class. We have this week and then the week after this, and then we're done. You have your final, which I'll give you more information about soon. Okay, this week we're going to talk about two stories, two very good but also very upsetting stories. What We Talk About When We Talk About Love by Raymond Carver and A Perfect Day for Bananafish by J.D. Salinger. And on Canvas, I made a post about us talking, or you guys watching the video first and then reading it. Or rather, I'm sorry, it's the exact opposite. Read the stories and then watch the video, and then go back and read some of the story again, because it'll make a little bit more sense. So the first one we're going to talk about is What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, Raymond Carver. Some background information about Raymond Carver. He is, or was, one of the prominent writers of the 1980s, American writers of in the 80s, because of the way he wrote. He's what we call a minimalist, and he has very sparse details. We don't really know a lot about the characters except through dialogue. He doesn't describe them very much. We don't get very many descriptions of the setting, and it's as little information as you can. Think of minimalist furniture or minimalist design, where everything is very kind of basic, not basic, but particular, and they make a statement. Each thing is purposeful. So critics call the settings of Raymond Carver's stories Hopelessville, USA. And Hopelessville, USA is particularly, it's a deliberate term that critics came up with because all of Carver's stories are very upsetting, and they take this tone and mood that is very hopeless. All of the characters have to deal with some sort of reckoning, or they have to deal with their own mortality or their own flaws, all of these things, and it creates very sad stories throughout. So in What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, here is a group of friends who are friends, two couples. I think using friend would be a bit of a stretch. Who are standing around their kitchen, or Mel and Terry's kitchen counter, drinking gin and tonics, which another important factor about Raymond Carver is that he was an alcoholic, and he eventually did die because of it. But a lot of his stories, most of his stories, if not all of them, at least the ones that I've read, all have to deal with somebody drinking something. And this story in particular is important because alcohol becomes a part of the setting and why it's important to see what these characters say. So when we're reading this, we have to remember where they are, the kitchen. So the kitchen is what we call in regular American discourse, and it's an American idiom. The kitchen is the heart of the home, right? So when we talk about the heart of the home, we know that that's the place where everyone comes together and they have community. That's the place where we nourish ourselves, where we find love, where we cultivate love and bonds. And here, that is the attempt that these Mel, Terry, Nick, and Laura are trying to do. I don't think they do it successfully. So, kitchen is the heart of the home. The second thing is Mel is a cardiologist, which is a heart doctor. He's a cardiac surgeon. So he fixes hearts. Like, that is literally his job. He's going to fix hearts, and he is perfectly attuned to do it. He calls himself a mechanic. And surgeons do tend to describe themselves as the body mechanics, which makes sense. They fix us. And that's Mel's job. So when we look at the setting on top of Mel's job as a cardiologist, we have to consider what the heart is representing. The heart is the symbol of love. We draw hearts when we're in love. We know that is the essential life-beating thing in our bodies. It gives us life. It pumps blood to our brains and to everywhere else. It's one of the most important organs. And it's the symbol of love, right? One last thing about the setting is the sunset. So as the story progresses, I hope you've noticed that we start off in the day, and as the story keeps going on and on and on, the day gets darker. Excuse me, the sun sets, and we are no longer in the daytime, but the story ends with the characters just sitting in the dark. Just imagine you sitting having a conversation that is so enthralling and so troubling that you sit in the dark. There are moments where you sit in the dark and just stare off into space because you're like, I don't know what else to think about because something monumental has just happened. And for these characters, they're learning things about themselves and each other, particularly about Mel and Terry. So what we talk about when we talk about love, that story or that title is clunky. It's an awkward title. I don't think editors would go for it if it didn't serve a particular purpose. Love is, and this sounds kitschy and lame, but love is the most complicated emotion that we can feel because we don't know how to define it. These characters struggle in the very beginning to define what love is. Terry's idea of love is so profoundly skewed that us as readers are like, whoa, Terry, like, you need some professional help, Terry. Like, you can't say him abusing you is love. And Mel understands that because I think it comes in part from his career. But Mel also has a very skewed idea of love where it is inherently violent. There is this kind of brutality to Mel's love. He's very intense with his love towards Terry. And Nick and Laura, on the other hand, are very subtle. It's the subtle hand grazes. It's the gentle kiss on the hand. It's all of these things that are very soft and not intense. Unlike Mel and Terry, when they talk, you're like, okay, what's going to happen? Like, he seems like he's a fuse ready to bust or blow up. And Terry, too, has these moments where she's like a nervous wreck. And that's partly because of the trauma she had to deal with her ex-husband, Ed. So all of these things are working together to create a certain atmosphere and a particular mood in the story. And mood, according to lenses here, is going to be the way... I'm sorry, I had the right definition. Yeah, the mood is going to be the way that the story is setting itself up, how the story is creating emotion through characters, dialogue, and all of the things that happen. So one of the ways that we create mood is atmosphere. And that is deliberate because how we behave in spaces, how we feel in spaces changes, right? So imagine how you feel when you're at the beach versus when you're at school, right? Or think of the different space, how you interact and behave in different spaces. And that's all political, right? So politics are determined politics is how we interact from person to person. Think about it in terms of how our politics change from place to place too. How do we behave with people from space to space? How you talk to your mother at home is going to be different than how you talk to your mother outside of your home, right? Or how you behave with your friends in front of your mom is going to be different than how you behave with your friends just alone, right? So that's the political idea of this story. And there is this gendered politic here that seems very fraught with masculine energy, where people like Mel and Ed are rather dangerous to characters like Terry, where we don't know where their fuse is going to go off. We don't know what they're going to do. They're unpredictable. And what doesn't help is that they keep having gin and tonics. So, and that's an ironic thing because all doctors know that gin and tonics are the ones that cause the most liver cirrhosis. So, when we think about what we talk about when we talk about love, think about how the atmosphere, the setting of the kitchen, and then the shifts to the hospital, to the house where Ed and Terry used to live, all of those subtle setting changes create a particular mood to make us feel something, what Carver is trying to get us to think about when we talk about love, when we think about love in general. The main quote from the story is we ought to feel ashamed when we talk like we know what we're talking about when we talk about love. And that sense of that sentence has so many words that it's difficult to find it to say it almost. I've said it a bunch of times just because I've read this story a bunch and I've taught it many times. So I know that line by heart, but also it's a clunky sentence that has way too many prepositional phrases and clauses, and we don't really know what to do with it. So, and it ends that section. That section ends with that quote. So we want to question how all of this clunkiness, how Mel's drunkenness, all of these things play into how the setting works, the atmosphere, how everyone is feeling, and the mood. And to get to understand the mood a little bit, I think you should put yourself in the story. So imagine if you were watching your friends talk like this. what would you do? How would you feel? What kind of mood would they be giving off, right? So whenever I think about mood, I think about those mood rings that people used to wear in the 90s. They used to get stuck on my finger. But when you were really upset, they would turn this deep black licorice looking black. And this story is just fraught with negative energy for me. And that sounds really silly, but there's so much energy happening. Everyone's always like picking up glasses and moving things around and touching their hands or touching each other's hands. And Terry's always balled up like this, and Mel's always picking up his drink. At the end, he pours the drink all over the counter. There's movement and energy throughout the story, but it's all very tense energy and very negative, and we don't know how to feel about it. Or, well, we do know how to feel about it, but the other characters don't know how to feel about it. There's a particular reason why the narrator is Nick and not Mel, because if Mel were the narrator, we would have gotten all that information about him wanting to talk to his kids, all that information about what he feels like about Ed and Terry. And the most interesting thing for me in this story is his treatment of Laura, Mel's treatment of Laura, where he says, if I weren't married to Terry and if Nick weren't my best friend, I would fall in love with you. Imagine if somebody said that to your partner. This story just blows me away every time I read it, and I really hope you guys liked it. And the way, please pick up on the way that the sun is working and how all of it is combined into this very intense story that does not seem very intense at all. And that's part of minimalism. And we'll talk more about that next week with Ernest Hemingway. I got a little carried away. I'm a little excited about talking about that story. I love it so much. Okay, I had to create another video because I accidentally pressed the other button and I was going on and on about what we talk about when we talk about love. This video about Bananafish is going to be much shorter. So, J.D. Salinger is the one who wrote A Perfect Day for Bananafish. And J.D. Salinger is a major American writer in the later 20th century who is known for a few things, particularly, and possibly the one that you guys have read, Catcher in the Rye. But he's also really famous for this book of short stories called 9 Stories, the very first one of which is Bananafish. So, J.D. Salinger was known for being a recluse. He just didn't leave his house. People didn't take his photo from like 1945 until, when did he die? I was in college when he died. 2012, I think. So like it was a good span of no time between no one knew what he looked like. So he's very interesting in that regard, but his stories also always feature some broken people. And broken in the sense that these people have some psychological trauma following World War II, or from some sort of other trauma, or just living their lives. They're broken psychologically. There's a great quote about J.D. Salinger who says, I can't remember who says it. They say, in order to write a book, you have to be broken. And J.D. Salinger had that brokenness as a part of his life because he did fight in World War II. So there is a lot to talk about here, and I don't want us to misconstrue the story. So we start off with Muriel talking on the phone with her mother, and that part of the story is very quick because there's dialogue and there's a lot happening. And Muriel's mother in particular is very concerned about her daughter. And you're reading this and you're like, why the hell does she care? Like, what's wrong with this guy? And we don't really get what's going on. And Muriel is a staunch believer in defending her husband. And she waited for him during the war. And that's honorable, that's venerable. We believe in her. You're like, this is a classic American story. This is the beginning of this is the couple that's going to give birth to the baby boomers. So we want to believe in them. She waited for him in that very romantic way. He came back to her, and they're a lovely couple, good looking, all of these things. But there is this flaw, and Muriel's mother is the one who kind of clues us in on it. We're like, okay, Seymour, something's up with Seymour. And we realize that it's something with the war when she says that their psychiatrist friend can't believe that he was let out of the hospital. And so we have to immediately put 2 and 2 together, and that becomes PTSD, right? So back when World War II happened, PTSD was still rather like called shell shock, and all of these things were still happening, or all of the conversations around it were still in its nascency. And psychologists really after that started putting a name to it. And the same thing happened after World War I, but now we have a much more positive discussion about it. There is understanding. There's an understanding about what war is like, and during World War II and after it, unfortunately, a lot of people didn't understand what was going on with it and how to help people who suffer from PTSD. So J.D. Salinger talks a lot about that, and we see that in this story. So Muriel begins this first half of the story, Muriel and her mother, and we don't really know why. We just know that Seymour has some issues. He is not altogether psychologically sound, and we're just clued in on it, right? And we don't really know the extent of how bad it is until we get the foil of this situation when we were inside the hotel room with Muriel on the phone with her mother. Then we go outside with Seymour and Sybil. And Sybil is an interesting character because here's this 3-year-old, 3 or 4 years old, who has attached herself to this man on the beach. And that is immediately our sensibilities in the 21st century, and I'm sure back then too, are very cautious. We're like, okay, what's going to happen with this older dude hanging out with this little girl? We are very cautious of it. But it is this a pretty, for the most part, innocent time at the beach, right? They're playing at the beach because she's found him and likes him, and he likes her. And we have to question why he likes her. And one of the things is his PTSD. He has reverted back to an innocence that is deeply disturbing as readers. So we read it and we're like, okay, this guy is potentially very dangerous, and he has reverted back to a childlike behavior. He's creating up animals called bananafish that don't really, they can't eat bananas underwater. There's made up animals, and he is he's creating this imaginary world as if to cope for the very harsh reality of the war, right? So he too latches onto this innocent spirit of Sybil. Sybil is so innocent, in fact, that she can't even function, or her cognitive ability is not even high enough to understand his full name, Seymour Glass. She says Seymour Glass. That's 3 different words. So this also gives a clue into how parenting styles were way different back then. Her mom goes to have a martini with her friend, and she says, "I'll bring you back the olive." That would not fly in America right now, or anywhere. That's crazy. I always laugh at that part because I'm like, it's just ridiculous. Okay, so Seymour Glass has this awful PTSD and has reverted back to an innocent state, a childlike state where he creates these banana fish. The beach itself functions interestingly here. Here is this outside space that is in between both the sea and the land. It is what we call a liminal space. So when we say liminal, it is a place that's the in-between, kind of like the space in Stranger Things. The upside down is this in-between place between the real world and the fake world. Here, both the sea and the beach are real, but the shore coming together is this weird wet and dry space. And it highlights the ways that Seymour is going to fluctuate in the story. Here, on one side, he's going to go very innocent and very childlike. And then at the end, we realize he makes this very adult, mature decision. Not mature, I don't know if mature is the right word. But he makes this very adult decision to shoot himself in the face with Muriel right there. Like, I hope we got that. He sleeps in the same bed as her and shoots himself there. So Muriel is going to wake up and see this. So we see this dichotomy working all the time. Again, with the outside space of the beach and the inside space of the hotel, and all of that coming together. So, Bananafish, think about the mood that we're supposed to feel after this, or the mood that Salinger is bringing forward at the end of this. What is he trying to say with these characters? What is he trying to get at? The other thing is how atmosphere is working. How are these characters' dialogues working? How is all of this coming together to create a very intense situation? at the end, right? So again, it's not as long as the other part about Carver's story, but Bananafish is very intense and very good. I hope you enjoy it too, though it is disturbing. I hope you guys have a great week. Remember that your memes are due. I really look forward to those. And there's information about the memes in the syllabus. Have a great week. I'll talk to you later.